She was mid-sentence, live television, millions of people watching. And then, she stopped. Not the kind of pause that happens when someone forgets their line. Not a technical glitch. Not a teleprompter freeze. This was something else entirely. Her voice, the voice that had carried America through elections, disasters, and moments of collective grief, cracked, right there, on camera, in front of everyone. People watching at home felt it immediately. You know that feeling when something on screen makes you set down whatever you're holding? This was that. The kind of wrong that doesn't come from a bad morning or a stressful commute. This was deeper. Something that had been building quietly, invisibly, for a long time. Her co-hosts glanced at each other. That split-second look that says everything without a single word. And then her eyes filled. The crew kept rolling. Because that's what live television does. It doesn't pause for pain. It doesn't wait for composure. It just keeps moving, keeps broadcasting. Even when the person in front of the camera is quietly falling apart. But nobody in that studio. Nobody watching from home. Nobody scrolling their phone who suddenly looked up could pretend they didn't see it. Savannah Guthrie, one of the most composed, unshakable anchors in American television history. The woman who sat across from presidents and asked the questions nobody else had the nerve to ask. Breaking, right there, in real time, and what came out of her in the moments that followed. Nobody was ready for it to understand what that moment actually meant. You have to understand who Savannah Guthrie really is. Not the polished version the cameras show. Not the highlight reel. The real version, the one that existed long before the studio lights and the morning show smile. She didn't grow up expecting any of this. Her family moved constantly. She lost her father when she was still young, the kind of loss that reshapes a child quietly, permanently. Her mother raised 3 kids alone and held everything together through sheer, stubborn will. Savannah watched that. She studied it. She carried it with her. She put herself through school, worked her way into journalism the slow, unglamorous way. Covered stories that mattered for years before anyone outside her newsroom knew her name. She was never handed anything. Every inch of ground she took, she earned. By the time she became co-host of the Today Show, she had already done things most television journalists never get close to. She could anchor a breaking news crisis without a tremor in her voice. She could sit across from a grieving mother one day and a sitting president the next, and find exactly the right tone for both. She had a gift for making difficult conversations feel human without ever losing their weight. People trusted her, not because she was polished, because she felt genuine, because even through a screen, you got the sense that what you were seeing was actually real. And that's precisely what made the breakdown so hard to watch. Because when she broke, it didn't feel like a television moment. It didn't feel staged. It felt like a real human being reaching the absolute outer edge of something they had been holding together for too long, and finally, involuntarily, losing their grip on it. Her co-host reached over slowly, just a hand on her shoulder. A small, quiet gesture, but in that moment, it said more than any scripted line ever could. The control room faced a decision in real time. Cut away, go to commercial, redirect the segment. They had seconds to decide. They stayed with her, and what she said next, through the tears she was barely managing to hold back, through the unsteady breathing she was fighting to control, changed the atmosphere of that entire studio, changed the day for millions of people watching. She looked directly into the camera and said she needed to tell everyone something. The studio went completely still. There are moments in live television that become permanent, that burn themselves into the collective memory of everyone who witnessed them. The kind of moments that people reference years later. I remember exactly where I was when I saw that. This became one of those moments. What Savannah revealed wasn't what anyone expected. It wasn't a scandal. It wasn't a resignation. It wasn't the kind of dramatic announcement that morning show producers script for ratings. It was something far more personal than that. Far more raw. She had been quietly dealing with a health situation, away from the cameras, away from the headlines, away from the carefully lit world of live television that demanded she show up every morning bright and grounded and fully present. She had kept it to herself, the way people do when they don't want to become the story, when they don't want the people around them to worry. when they've spent so long being the steady one that they genuinely don't know how to be anything else, but it had become too heavy to carry alone anymore. She started speaking slowly, the way you do when the words have been locked inside for so long that releasing them feels almost physical, like the truth has actual weight, and the only way to get it out is to push through that weight one sentence at a time. Her vision, that's what it was. And I condition that had been getting worse, quietly, steadily, without warning or announcement, one that had already stolen meaningful sight from one eye and was beginning to threaten the other. She had been waking up every single morning not knowing exactly what she would be able to see that day, sitting in the makeup chair wondering whether today would be the day. Something visibly changed on air, standing in front of the camera, the job she had devoted her entire adult life to, quietly unsure of how much longer she could keep doing it. And almost no one knew that her husband knew. Her children understood only fragments of it. Children absorb what they can and protect themselves from the rest. Her closest friends at the show had sensed something was off, had asked careful questions, and had been deflected every time. She had laughed things off, changed subjects, shown up anyway, performed at a level that gave nothing away while she was quietly managing something that would have derailed most people's ability to function at all, because that was who she was. That was the identity she had built. The person who showed up, the person who held the line, the one in the room who didn't flinch even when everything else was shaking. And now she was sitting on live television, telling the truth she had protected for months, because the weight of protecting it had finally become greater than the fear of letting it go. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, the kind of silence a room holds when it understands that something true and irreversible has just been said out loud. Her co-host didn't speak, just held her hand. What happened after she finished talking was something that studio had never experienced before. The show kept moving. That's the nature of live television. It has no mechanism for pause, no ability to absorb and reflect. It just continues forward. But the energy inside that building had changed completely. The manufactured brightness that morning shows run on, that deliberate warmth, that relentless positivity, had been replaced by something uncomfortably, powerfully real. Viewers who had been half watching while pouring coffee stopped, put the mug down, stood still in their kitchens and just watched. People who had the show playing in the background of their offices turned around in their chairs, even online, which moves faster than almost anything. There was a pause, a few seconds where nothing happened, as if the internet itself needed a moment to process what it had just witnessed before it knew how to respond. And then it moved. Messages, hundreds of thousands of them, then more. Not the scripted language of celebrity sympathy cycles, not the carefully managed public relations responses that usually follow moments like this. Real messages from real people sitting in real places with their own real things they had been holding quietly. People who were navigating health scares they hadn't told their families about. People who had been carrying something painful for so long they had stopped recognizing how heavy it had gotten. People who had watched Savannah every single morning for years and suddenly felt, in the strangest, most unexpected way, like they truly knew her for the first time. One message kept reappearing, over and over, from strangers across the country who didn't know each other but were saying the exact same thing. I thought I was the only one doing this alone. That line did something that all the perfectly crafted messages of support didn't. It told the truth about what Savannah had actually given people in that moment. Not inspiration, not a lesson, not a performance of resilience. Just the radical, the stabilizing comfort of knowing someone else had been quietly drowning in the same water. But while the public was pouring out its heart in real time, something very different was happening behind the scenes. In offices Savannah wasn't in. In conversations she wasn't part of. Questions were being asked, carefully, quietly, in the controlled language of professionals who know how to discuss difficult things without ever quite saying them directly. How long could she realistically continue? What did this mean for the show going forward? What were the risks if something happened on air? Television is a brutal industry. It wraps itself in warmth and relatability and human connection, and underneath all of that is a Machine that runs on performance and reliability and the kind of consistency that doesn't leave room for uncertainty. And even the people inside that machine who genuinely cared about Savannah as a person also had responsibilities to a show, a brand, a viewership, a business. Those two things, caring about someone and protecting an institution, don't always point in the same direction. She didn't know those conversations were happening, not yet. She found out the way you find out things you were never supposed to know. Not from a direct conversation, not from someone sitting across from her and being honest, from a fragment, an overheard comment, a moment where someone's professional composure slipped, just barely enough to reveal what was underneath it. And when she understood what was being discussed, what was being quietly, carefully weighed while she was out there every single morning, still showing up, something changed inside her. Not loudly, not dramatically, but completely. She had given everything to that show. Every morning for years, she had shown up after personal loss, after physical recovery, after the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that sleep doesn't touch. She had shown up because that was the commitment she had made and the standard she had set for herself. And now the quiet conversation in the building where she worked was about whether she was still an asset or whether she was beginning to become a risk. She didn't confront anyone. That's not in her nature. Instead, she went somewhere inside herself that people who have known her longest recognize immediately as the place she goes when she's preparing to do something significant. She started making calls, having conversations with her doctors that were different from the ones she'd had before. Not the careful, managing conversations where medical professionals try to soften the edges of difficult information. She started asking harder questions, blunter ones. She pushed past the language of caution and asked what was actually possible. What she heard back surprised her. There was a path she hadn't been clearly shown. A treatment option, not a guarantee, not a cure, but a real, medically supported possibility of protecting what sight she still had, of slowing what was happening, of preserving something she had been slowly watching herself lose. It required surgery. It required real recovery time. It required stepping away from the show, the thing she had organized her entire professional identity around for years. That was terrifying, in its own quiet way, but the alternative, continuing to perform steadiness, while her world silently narrowed, was something she had already decided she couldn't keep doing. She made the decision. She told the show. And the response from the network, from the same institution whose behind closed doors conversations had cut her so deeply, was not what she braced herself for. They supported her, publicly, fully, without visible hesitation. You can receive that with pure gratitude. You can also receive it with the clear-eyed understanding that the public had watched her break down on live television, and the backlash of responding any other way would have been severe. Both readings are probably true. Most things in large institutions are. But what happened in Savannah's personal world when that support came? That was real in a way that had nothing to do with optics. Her co-hosts reached out in ways that went beyond the professional. Old friends she had lost regular contact with called. Colleagues who had always respected her from across the room found their way to her directly. Personally, people sent small things, handwritten notes, ordinary objects that carried meaning, that told her she had been seen in ways she hadn't known. She went into surgery. And the show continued. The lights stayed on. The cameras kept rolling. But something inside that building felt different in her absence. The way a room feels different when someone who has always been a constant in it is suddenly, unexpectedly gone. The days were quiet. Her return was not rushed. She came back on her own timeline, in a way that felt deliberate and unhurried, different from the version of herself that had spent years treating every absence as a failure of commitment. When she sat back down in that chair, she looked like herself. But the quality of her presence had shifted in a way that people who watched closely could feel. Something that had been held extremely tightly for an extremely long time had released slightly, not in a way that diminished her, in a way that made her somehow more present, more honest, more there. She talked about what the time away had given her, not in the language of a prepared statement, but in the way she had slowly learned through everything that had happened, to just say the actual true thing. She talked about how frightening it is to be the strong one for so long that you genuinely forget you're allowed to ask for help. How that identity, the reliable one, the steady one, the one who shows up, can become a kind of trap you build around yourself so gradually you stop noticing the walls. She talked about her children, about lying in recovery and watching them, and realizing that she had been physically present in their lives, while being somewhere else entirely inside her head, cycling through worry, management, performance, for years without fully recognizing it. She talked about the moment before surgery when she was lying on that hospital bed and she wasn't thinking about the show or her career or any of the things that had occupied the front of her mind for so long. She was thinking about whether the people she loved most had actually felt her, really felt her, in the ways that mattered. That question had rearranged something in her at a fundamental level, and she said, quietly, without building to it, without any drama, that the breakdown on live television had been one of the most important things that had ever happened to her, not because it was easy, not because she would willingly go through it again, but because it had forced something open that had needed opening for a very long time. It had let people in. It had made her human in the one place she had worked hardest, for the longest time, to appear unbreakable. The studio held that for a moment, and this time, unlike the silence that had followed her tears, this quiet didn't feel like something collapsing. It felt like something settling, something finding its right place. There's something that happens when you watch a person you trust finally tell the truth out loud, something it does to the part of you that's been keeping your own truth quiet. It makes you ask what you've been carrying. It makes you wonder who you haven't let in yet. If any part of Savannah's story landed somewhere real for you, drop it in the comments. Say what it made you think about. Say what it stirred up, because the most honest conversations don't always happen on screen. Sometimes they happen right below it. And if you want more stories told like this, real, human, without the filter, you already know what to do.